Hi, I'm Roy from Roy's Garage. Today I have a 2014 Honda CRV 2.4 liter automatic, and I'm going to show you how to replace the front and rear brake pads and front and rear rotors. These are the tools I'm going to be using today to do this job. This is a rubber hammer, 3-pound sledgehammer, flat tip screwdriver, 19mm wrench, 17mm wrench, 12mm wrench, 10mm wrench. This is an impact screwdriver. This is a caliper compressor, vice grip, and this is another caliper compressor. My Phoenix brake bleeder, some ceramic grease, anti-seize, brake clean, suction ball, and a bottle of water with a hole in it. Okay, these are the parts that I'm going to be using today for this job. It's going to be rear pads, rear rotors, .3 brake fluid, front pads, and front rotors. So we're going to be replacing the front brake pads and the front brake rotors first. So what I'll do is remove this plug, the breather screw plug, and I'm going to be loosening this bleeder screw. Because this thing is mounted solid, it's a lot easier to loosen it. Okay, so now I'm going to be removing this caliper. Remove these pins. Removing the brake pads. Then I'm going to be removing the caliper mount. There's two 19mm. Okay, so now I'm going to be removing this rotor, but before we remove it, I'm going to have to take off this screw right here. So I'm going to be using an impact Phillips screwdriver to remove it, and we hit it. Wow, this rotor is stuck. So what we do is we'll hit it. Okay. Okay, so this is your brake caliper. So I'm going to be compressing the piston in. But before I do that, I'm going to loosen up this bleeder screw. So when I squeeze the piston in, the brake fluid can come out of the bleeder screw. If you don't, then all that dirty fluid is going to go back up to your master, and it could ruin your master. So we're going to open up this bleeder screw a little. Then I'm going to put this guy in. I'm going to put the compressor in, and then we're going to squeeze it. Okay, so squeeze it in all the way until it stops, and then tighten up your bleeder screw. Okay. So this is a coated rotor. It's a premium rotor. Don't take the coating off. The reason why they put a coating is so it doesn't rust. So what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna wipe it down with some brake clean, make sure there's no oil on it. So I'm gonna be putting some anti-seize right around the hub. So the next time it's a lot easier to come off. So what we gotta do now is we gotta line up this hole with this screw. So before I put this screw on, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put some anti-seize on this screw, so the next time it's easier to come off. If you notice, this rotor has two holes. You're supposed to put another screw over here, but the rotor that I took off only had one hole and with one screw. So I don't have another screw, so we'll just use the one that came off. Okay, we're gonna be checking the pins to see if it moves freely. In this case, this pin moves really freely, very easy. So you don't have to take it apart and re-grease it. A lot of times these pins get stuck, so you got to take it apart, re-grease it, and put it back. But in this case, it moves real freely, so you don't have to take it apart. And then I'm going to be lubricating the hardware. I'm going to be using the old hardware. There is a new hardware in the brake box, but the new one doesn't really fit too good like the original. So if your original one is still good, just reuse it. There's nothing wrong with reusing this hardware. So now I'm going to be installing this caliper mount. But before we do anything, this pan right here, let's move it away. In case something falls down, you don't want to have it falling in the pan, especially your brake pads. You cannot break this bolt. This is a grade 10. Just make it really, really tight. Okay. This is the new pad, this is the old pad. The old pad is really, really thin. This is the new pad. There's a real big difference, yeah, in the padding. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna be putting the outside pad on first. And then the inside of the pad, there is a wear indicator. So what you're gonna do is put this on the leading edge. This rotor is turning counterclockwise, so you want this tab wear indicator to be on the leading edge. If you have a pad where this is on the trailing edge, that pad goes to the right side of the car. Okay, so we're going to put a little bit grease on the outside of the inside of the pad. You only need a real thin layer. Then we're going to put a little grease on the caliper. You only need a little bit grease, not too much. So now we're going to be putting on these anti-rattler wires or clips. So what you gotta do is you gotta hold this thing together. Because if you don't, then a pad is gonna spread apart. So you just gotta hold it together and at the same time put the caliper on. Okay, now we're gonna do the back brakes. So now we're gonna be replacing the driver's side rear brake pads and rotors. So first we're gonna be removing this plug. Then I'm gonna be loosening up the bleeder screw while it's still mounted. Just loosen it, okay? So now we're gonna be removing the caliper. So we're gonna kind of wiggle this thing up. Okay. So pull it straight up. We're gonna be removing the caliper mount. Okay, so I'm gonna be removing this screw. It's a Phillips screw. I'm gonna be using my impact screwdriver. Okay, I'm gonna be removing the rotor. So I'm gonna be removing the brake line mount. That way it's a little easier to put the caliper on. Okay, so this is the caliper. So we're gonna be squeezing this piston in. So you gotta leave this brake pad on there for now. I'm using a different compressor from the front because the front has a little bit more space between to put the tool in, but this guy, the space is so close, I have to use the other compressor. So we're going to open up the bleeder screw. I'm going to compress the piston in. So now the dirty brake fluid is coming out of the bleeder screw. Just crank it down all the way till it stops. Then you tighten up the bleeder screw. Then remove your compressor. Now you can remove the inner brake pad. Okay, this is the new rear rotor. This has the same black coating as the front. Don't remove it. Just shoot some brake clean and make sure there's no oil on it. So I'm going to be transferring this plug to the new rotor. The reason why there's a hole in it is that way when you get this rotor on, you can actually adjust the emergency brake. But it's too hard to adjust the emergency brake through this hole. So it's a lot easier if you adjust it and slide the thing on. And then if it's kind of too loose, pull it off and then readjust it again and slide the thing back on. But for now, we're going to be transferring this rubber plug to the new rotor. Before we put the rotor on, I want to put some anti-seize around the hub. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try to see if this thing fits the emergency brake shoes fit into the rotor. So you got to find out, you got to line up these screw holes with the rotor and put it on and spin it. If it's too loose, then what you need to do is expand the shoe outwards to give it a little drag. Just turn it a few turns and then try fit it back again. Okay, gotta go a little tighter. Now that is too tight, so we're gonna loosen it a little. Okay. Maybe can go one notch tighter. Okay, that should be perfect. So what we're gonna do now is I'm gonna be putting only one screw in, because the original rotor that I took off only had one screw, only had one hole, never have the other hole. So we're just going to be putting on one screw. So before I put the screw on, I'm going to put some anti-seize on. And then just tap it in. Okay, so we're going to be checking the pins. This pin is sliding in and out really easy, so we don't have to take it apart and then re-grease it. If it's stuck, then yeah, you got to take it apart and re-grease it. But if this thing slides in and out really easy, just leave it alone. So now we're going to lubricate the hardware as much as possible. Try reuse the old hardware. There is new hardware in the kit, but a lot of times the kit doesn't fit too good. Sometimes it starts to fall off when you're putting this thing together. So as much as possible, try use the old hardware, unless the hardware is broken. So before we even put anything on, let's move this pan away, because you don't want anything falling in the pan, especially the brake pads while you're putting it on. So we're going to be installing the caliper mount. Okay. So first, we're going to be installing the inside pad onto the caliper. So these prongs, it has to fit inside of the piston. Because this is new, a lot of times, you know, these prongs are really tight, so you really got to force it in. So put a little grease, ceramic grease, on your pad, little bit on your piston, and then we're going to slide it in. Okay, make sure your pad is all the way seated against the piston. Okay, so now we're going to lubricate the caliper, put a little bit grease. Okay, so now we're going to be putting on the outside pad. Now we can slide the caliper on. Okay. This inner pin is moving. So what I'm gonna do is get a vice grip, and I'm gonna grip the inside and just hold the inside pin so it doesn't spin while I'm tightening it. Okay, the rotors that I put on the front and rear, they're coated rotors. So what's going to happen is when we road test the vehicle, you're going to hear a grinding sound. But don't be alarmed, because all of this coating is going to have to come off. And once it comes off, all the grinding sound is going to go away. So you're looking maybe about 3 miles or so, you know, before it actually goes away. So don't be alarmed. The first time you step the brake and the thing starts to grind, don't be alarmed. Eventually it's going to go away. So now I'm going to be securing the brake hose. Okay, so now I'm going to flush out and bleed the complete brake system. Okay, so this is the brake master cylinder. It's right in front of the driver's side. What we're going to do is I'm going to be sucking out all the old fluid from the master. So I'm going to have to remove this cover. Okay, I'm going to be removing the screen in here. They're going to be sucking out all the old brake fluid. Okay, just put the cover back on. So right now I'm going to be using this Phoenix brake bleeder to flush out the brake fluid. So I'm getting it ready right now. So how we're going to bleed this is the wheel that's farthest away from the master we're going to do first. So that would be the passenger rear. And then the next one is going to be the driver's rear. Then the next one is going to be the the passenger's front. And the next one going to be the driver's front. Okay, this is the last caliper that I'm going to be flushing out. I already flushed out the 2 rear and then the right front. Now I'm going to be doing the left front. This is the closest one to the master. The way you flush it out is all the same. So now I'm going to be flushing out this driver front. This is the last one closest to the master. So I'm going to be opening up the bleeder screw. And I'm going to be pumping fresh fluid from the caliper up to the master. I use about half a bottle of brake fluid per wheel. Okay. Now we'll tighten up the bleeder screw. So I'm going to be sucking out the master. So you got to remember, every time you flush out a wheel, you always suck out the brake fluid. Some of the reservoirs are really small, so if you don't suck it out, when you do flush out the next caliper, the brake master cylinder might start overflowing. So now I'm going to be filling up the reservoir with some fresh brake fluid. So I'm going to be putting my screen back on. And my cover. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have to bleed each wheel, make sure there's no air in the system. Okay, first I'm going to start up the engine. Then I'm going to pump the brake pedal up and down, no more than halfway, until you feel some pressure. Okay. Now I'm going to be using my hood prop. I'm going to be putting it against the brake pedal and the seat to hold pressure. Now I'm going to go to each wheel and open up the bleeder screw to make sure there's no air in the system. Okay, so I bled all the other 3 wheels. So this is the one I'm going to be bleeding last. This is the driver's side front. So there was no air in the system, so now I'm going to lock up the bleeder screw. Okay. So I'm going to be shooting some water on top of the bleeder screw. What it's doing is water is neutralizing the brake fluid. So I'm going to be doing that to all the wheels. Okay, so with my air gun, I'm going to blow it down. So I'm going to be doing that to all the other wheels. So now what I'm going to do is pressurize the brake again. Just pump it a couple times and then press down the brake pedal and hold it for maybe like 20 seconds or so. And then from there we're going to check all the bleeder screws, make sure there's no leak. So all the bleeder screws look dry. So what I'm going to do is put this rubber cap on. Okay, so we're going to be making sure this brake fluid is full. Right now it's full. If it's a little on the low side, just top it off. Put this guy back on. This covering on. So I'm going to be brushing on a little bit anti-seize on each wheel stud. So I'm going to be putting on the left front tire. I'm going to be using this pry bar to lift it up. So you got to kind of like line up the whole eyeball from the hole to the wheel stud. So I'm going to use my pry bar and I'm going to lift it up and put it on. Okay. So now I'm going to be tightening up the wheel nuts with my impact wrench. So what I like to do is use my knees and kind of put the tire against the hub. And just tighten it down. Just snug it first. Then you can make it tight. Then the final tightening. So you want to do it in a crisscross pattern. That way you tighten everything evenly. So I road tested the vehicle. That grinding sound that the coated rotor has is finally gone. Everything works perfect. Another job well done. If you like my videos, please subscribe, give me a thumbs up, tell all your friends and family, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Aloha.